Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the ThePackHub's latest packaging webinar, Sustainable Packaging 2025 to 2035, Uncovering the Future of Packaging, your guide to sustainable success. What we're covering here today is really answering the questions to some of the challenges that you face in this world of sustainable packaging. In a moment, I'm going to introduce you to Matthew Rogerson, who has painstakingly put together a report over the last few months, looking at a 10-year global forecast informed by data from over 250 packaging leaders and sustainability experts. So really tour de force of everything you need to know about sustainable packaging looking forward to in terms of the next 10 years. This isn't an attempt to just sell you a report. What we're doing here is, as part of the registration process, we've asked questions from you, and Matthew has collated those questions and he will be answering them live over the next sort of 35 to 40 minutes. We will also have an opportunity for Q&As, so please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and get your questions in, and then we'll have a sort of 10 or 15-minute session at the end where we will cover those questions. Any questions we can't answer, we will distribute in due course. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Matthew Rogerson, who will now take you through answering your questions from your webinar sign up. Sorry, last bit. Over to you, Matthew.
Thank you, Paul, and welcome to everybody who's joined us today. I know that we've got people all the way across to Australia at the moment, so I really appreciate you taking the time, whatever time of day or night it is, to join us today. We're navigating the future of sustainable packaging. So today I'm going to be directly addressing the real-world questions that you'd raised when you registered. And the goal is to equip you with clarity, strategy, and actionable insights to help guide and lead you through the upcoming changes. My idea and the plan for this webinar is it's going to help answer questions and show you where the information comes from within the report if you want to dive deeper into that. So let's go. In terms of most of the major forces that are going to be shaping packaging between 2025 and 2035, material innovation, cost pressures, regulatory developments, digitalization, and changing consumer expectations are all set to reshape the packaging industry in the next 10 years. Within materials, we're looking at a shift towards monomaterials, recyclable, refillable, reusable materials that are retained in the cycle for longer, and bio-based polymers, as well as fiber-based alternatives and innovations too. Costs currently are rising due to regulatory fees and sustainable material premiums, but efficiencies and scale are going to drive those costs down starting from about 2030. Regulatory momentum is moving towards full recyclability, traceability, and mandatory reporting. We're seeing the development of technology like smart labels, blockchain, and areas like digital passports that are going to enable real-time material recovery, tracking, and compliance and verification. When it comes to cost-related challenges, the main problem is the perceived high cost of sustainable packaging compared to traditional options. In the report, what we've found is that recycling systems can often break even within 5 to 7 years. Sustainable materials that have a high upfront costs do also have increasing economies of scale. So even though initially they are more expensive, as you lengthen the time of usage out, normally about 6 or 7 years, they start to fall quite dramatically. By 2031, 2032, sustainable packaging in most materials will become cheaper than traditional packaging in a number of different sectors. So early investment in material optimization, in eco-design, in circular system fitting, all of that is going to unlock short, middle, and long-term financial advantages. When it comes to material limitations, there's a number of questions about technical performance issues, recyclability, reuse, or challenges in avoiding degradation, and consumer confusion in what can and can't be done and where to put different materials in order to retain them. Emerging materials like mono-PE, emerging bioplastics, paper composites, they're all evolving to meet those performance and recovery standards and requirements in larger numbers, at scale, and at high volume. There's a number of recovery challenges in multi-layered and some bio-based materials that are being addressed by the accelerated chemical, electro, and enzymatic technologies that are coming onto the market. Scalability issues are being addressed in terms of compostable plastics, but also some of the bio-based innovations. And although consumers are confused for the most part about sustainable material claims and disposal, the use of digital traceability will help address that. So there's going to be a move from marketing claim to more verifiable facts. And that is going to help people to better understand the materials, where to put them, and to ensure that there are reduced material limitations. Overall, the focus is on balancing functionality, recyclability, and consumer clarity. So if you're using validated materials that are both able to meet real-world recovery system demands, but also consumer expectations. In terms of infrastructure, one of the problems is that the current infrastructure is insufficient to support future sustainable packaging goals. So there are a number of potential solutions to this that are coming online in the next 10 years. One of those is AI-driven material sorting, or automation and AI-driven material sorting, which helps to improve material recovery efficiency as well as the amount that is recovered. Investment in advanced systems like chemical recycling or electromagnetic, they're enabling harder to recycle materials like plastics to be reprocessed. And localized collection and closed loop systems are expanding globally, which is going to allow high quality recycled material streams to be coming more and more online. While there are infrastructure gaps that remain in many regions, the policy support of regulations that are incoming is going to help alleviate that in most cases. So navigating regulatory complexity, there is a rapid, diverse, and tightening set of regulatory frameworks that are all kind of coming one after another. And amongst them, you've got EPR, so extended producer responsibility, being adopted globally, which is shifting the costs onto producers. There are mandatory recycled content targets. There are material restrictions, so bans on certain plastics, on PFAS and other chemicals. And there are increasing traceability and transparency requirements, like digital product passports or GS1's Project Sunrise, which are emerging across markets. All of this is being designed to increase consumer trust in claims, particularly when it comes to sustainability claims, which are currently, for the most part, mistrusted. But the adoption of these regulations are going to make it easier for consumers to understand that when somebody makes a sustainability claim in the future, it will be verifiable. So companies that redesign for recyclability, reuse, refilling, material traceability, and minimal environmental impact, and do so now, are going to avoid the costly retrofits that are coming later, and also position themselves as compliance leaders rather than laggards. In terms of consumer expectations, although consumers express high intention to purchase sustainable packaging, as most of the people on this call will be very familiar, sometimes painfully so, their actual purchasing and disposal choices often do not align with that stated intention. One of the main set of barriers is price, convenience, and then confusion about disposal. All of those lead into consumers moving away from purchasing the sustainable choice at point of purchase, or in being too confused about what the right choice is and being overwhelmed and reverting back to their instinctive first choice. Increasingly, consumers are expecting brands to make their sustainable choice easier, clearer, affordable, and more of an emotional journey. So less of a rational decision and more of an emotive, experiential journey. At the moment, trust in environmental claims is very fragile. So authenticity, transparency are essential, as well as explaining what the benefit is to the consumer, rather than what the benefit is to the company in taking certain steps, how it makes their life better. Now, when it comes to end-of-life uncertainty, there are a number of times when the sustainability goals of a company are undermined because the end-of-life pathway is unclear or ineffective. That can be because of consumer confusion. It can be due to gaps in the infrastructure, or it can be material design issues. The strategies that are raised to address this problem go across multiple chapters in the report, so 4, 5, 6, and 8. But the short version is material choice matters. So focusing on simpler monomaterial packaging formats significantly increases the recycling rates. Infrastructure, because it varies widely by region, it's important to either invest in better end results, so better sorting and efficiency, and even recyclable, reusable, refillable materials are lost in the process, in the waste management process, due to poor or improper or miscommunicated disposal behavior. Within the US, it's about 75% of material that can be recycled is not actually ending up in a MRF because consumers don't put it there. And in Europe, which is performing slightly better, it's in the kind of 55 to 65% range. So the focus is on improving end-of-life uncertainty by both providing excellent education to consumers on what is recyclable but also giving them an actual waste stream to put it into. So if those two things are combined, it will dramatically improve the amount of material that they actually put into the correct system that can then be reclaimed. Mandatory labeling, harmonized recycling targets, and various schemes like EPR are all helping to drive better end-of-life outcomes, or to give the capabilities to drive better end-of-life outcomes. When it comes to cross-chain value collaboration, one of the problems within sustainable packaging is the alignment of all of the various stakeholders across the value chain. So it's vital to make sure that everybody's all working together, so that the brands, the converters, retailers, the recyclers, the policymakers, the consumers, everybody works together rather than in silo. Because the moment that there are silos or different parts working to cross purposes, it will slow progress, it will raise costs. So cross-chain collaboration has to become a foundational strategy for anybody hoping to succeed in the future of sustainable packaging. Early alignment with regulations makes it far easier, and it's far easier when everybody's working together to align with those regulations, if everybody works all the way across the value chain. Suppliers and converters need closer ties to the brands and the retailers' needs in order to be in the room when they're discussing the strategy, particularly for sustainable packaging, because that way it will give everybody who is touching the package visibility across the entire value chain. And if you've got an end-to-end focus on where the material is coming from, where it's going to, how it's going to be disposed, and all the people who touch that in the room, it'll make it a lot easier to collaborate together to produce the best possible fit-for-purpose product. Within the value chain collaboration, it's very important to help with cross-sector education, system integration, in order to make sure that the materials are captured effectively at end of life. This can be through building pre-competitive alliances around different material standards, engaging in joint reuse, refilling, recycling pilots with supply chain partners, sharing consumer-facing labeling and collection system improvements, which will make it easier for everybody to follow the material all the way from manufacture to reuse. When it comes to key trends, there's a fairly long list of things that are impacting the future of packaging or sustainable packaging in the next 10 years. So there isn't a single innovation or policy or trend that is more dominant than any of the others. There are multiple seismic shifts that are happening all at once. That's across materials, regulations, technology, and behavior. So the 5 major trends that are defining packaging through 2035 that we're seeing in the research for and authoring of the report. Circular economy dynamics. So brands need to design products and supply chains around circularity principles. So at every stage of development and design, making sure that it can be used, reused, reused again, or refilled again, or reconstituted again. Making sure that any of the material innovations that are being used are scalable, because it's not enough that the technology works, but it has to both be scalable and it has to run down the manufacturing lines of the people who are processing it, ideally at high speed, at high volume, without any loss of quality or performance. Due to the tightening of regulations, there are multiple legal frameworks that are all coming one on top of the other in the next 3 to 5 years. So things like PPWR, EPR schemes globally, the fulfillment or the conclusion of the UN Plastics Treaty is anticipated. They're all going to be setting strict new rules about what material can be on the market, how much of it needs to be recyclable, what materials can be used or not used, what percentage of it must be able to be recycled in order for it to be called a monomaterial or for it to be recyclable. And there's also a number of requirements about verifying and proving claims, making sure that products or parts don't fall apart very quickly so they don't have to be replaced more often than is necessary. When it comes to consumer and manufacturing behavior, consumers are increasing in activism and buying patterns that drive circular innovation. So they're voting with their wallets. Brands need to make sure that they're able to align manufacturing and sourcing practices in order to be able to better reach trends that are developing amongst consumers. One of the significant issues or gaps that exist at the moment is that the trend might be 6 months, 9 months, 12 months to develop, but manufacturing cycles tend to be 18 or 24 months. So making sure that the production and development of packaging is as robust and able to deal with changing or shifting consumer trends as possible is going to be a vital step for those who want to lead sustainable packaging in the next 10 years. And then technology and digitalization. So the use of blockchain, QR codes, smart sensors, refill tracking, AI-driven material tracing, all of that is going to be making a significant impact in being able to track, comply, and qualify and verify what's going on in sustainable packaging, both for consumers and for the people that are producing that packaging. In terms of future materials innovation, there's a short list here. I think the full list is probably twice this long in the report, but material innovation is crucial. But some of the challenges that are being faced are in scaling new sustainable packaging solutions. So there are technical limitations in different areas. For example, in bioplastics or in compostables, that can be anything from their durability to being able to run down existing lines at speed, through to shelf life, through to recyclability, reusability, refillability. There's limited infrastructure to recycle and compost some of the new materials. There's higher costs, lower consumer familiarity with the novel formats, and so there's supply chain risks and also there's low manufacturing volumes. So a number of things going on in terms of material innovation. Some of the ways of addressing these in the next 10 years are next generation recyclables. So improvements in flexible material recyclability, monomaterial formats, advanced bioplastics. So there's going to be a growth of PHA, PLA, PEF, second generation feedstocks. There will be a greater use of life cycle analysis. So tools that will help to pick materials that are lowest emissions, lowest resources, and lower cost as well. So trying to find the sweet spot between what is going to be the lowest footprint, but also cost the business the least in order to put those materials into the packaging and onto the market. There is a number of bans that are going to push companies to shift what they can use. And if we go to changing regulatory landscape, there are a number of changes that are upcoming. EU leads at the moment with packaging waste regulation, digital product passports, and then globally there's going to be the rollout of Project Sunrise. Across Europe, or outside of Europe, North America, Asia, Latin America, and Africa, there's a tightening of regulations. Mainly their shared focus is reduce of single-use plastics, enforcing recyclability, reduction or removal of problem materials or bans of problem materials. And there is a anticipated drive of material selection behind this regulation, which means that there's going to be a force into what materials companies can use, so what they're going to be able to design with, and some of the new recycling standards are going to be improved as well. There is going to be a increasing influence of the regulations on what is a sustainable material, how it can be developed, and selection criteria. There will be there's a full systems overview of different regulations and their impact, as well as the kind of costs of non-compliance in the full report. So when it comes to sustainable packaging by 2035, to get there, it requires behavior change at every point of the value chain. So it's the brands, the suppliers, the consumers. At the moment, a lot of the behaviors are often misaligned with circular goals, and that's due to cost pressures, to legacy systems, to consumer habits, and to limited existing infrastructure. So in order to accelerate behavioral change, there are things that companies can do. So top strategies that companies can use to embed sustainability into strategic planning, moving to lighter materials, setting public goals that they stick to in the 2030 to 2035 range, investing in life cycle assessment tools, reducing over packaging where possible, making and taking any small step to move towards lightening their footprint. Risk management around regulation is also a growing corporate driver. In terms of supply chain adaptation, suppliers are increasingly facing pressure to certify materials, to validate recyclability or reusability, and to innovate the packaging forms. Brands are restructuring supplier partnerships to prioritize traceability, improve recycled, reused content, and also into modular, repairable design to enable circular flows. Consumers stick with the intention action gap, but ways of reducing that are education campaigns, nudges, so things like looking at how do you nudge positioning, zero waste store growth, brand transparency, consumer actions that will drive the most sustainable packaging adoption are in the table on the slide that you're looking at right now. Success really depends on synchronized behavior change across the brands, supply chains, and consumers. The key is to redesign packaging with consumer alignment, circularity already built in, and by doing so, that will gain consumer trust, build resilience, and it will also lead to market leadership. let's see. This one seems to be future recycling systems. So there are a number of recycling infrastructure challenges. There's outdated technologies, there's inconsistent quality, there's limited scalability to handle complex packaging formats. So the solution is to look at advancing mechanical and chemical recycling. Advanced mechanical recycling is anticipated to build to about 40 to 45% coverage of the market by 2035. Chemical recycling, if it proceeds as planned, is anticipated to be able to cover about 10 to maybe 15, 16% of the market needs. There's emerging technologies like enzymatic recycling, which can break down polymers into monomers, allowing an infinite recycling without any loss of quality. And there's things like electrochemical recycling, which allow complex multi-material packaging to be recycled without any thermal degradation. There's the focus on investment now in order to get these systems up and running and efficient as early as possible. When it comes to EPR, producers are increasingly being held accountable and will continue to be held accountable for the end-of-life management of packaging through extended producer responsibility regulations. They're growing rapidly worldwide. They're covering more materials, and they're increasingly leading to strict recycling targets. They shift the financial responsibility to producers, which creates an urgent need for cost-effective, sustainable packaging solutions. The financial impact is considerable, but companies that transition early to recyclable, compostable, or reusable formats can benefit from reduced compliance costs and tax incentives. And some of the newer sustainable materials have variable EPR costs, and some even have exemptions or reductions. When it comes to refillable and reusable packaging, that is going to be an essential transition in the next 10 years in order to move towards a more circular framework. It faces a number of current real-world challenges. Some of those include reverse logistics infrastructure problems that can be severely lacking in some regions. There are behavioral changes and incentives in areas like deposit return schemes that are critical to get right in order to ensure consumer adoption. And so there's going to need to be a strong collaboration, again, up and down the whole value chain between the brands, the retailers, and the consumers and the suppliers in order to ensure that the loop or refill or reuse schemes are both supported and understood, and that they are adopted as swiftly as possible. So there's companies like Loop or Algramo that are driving refill models, and infrastructure scalability is a factor when materials are technically available. So it's important to make sure that the pilots can be effectively scaled in order to ensure the rollout of refillable and reusable packaging. Technology and digitalization. There is increasing pressure to provide traceability and product transparency, but traditional supply chains currently aren't quite designed for this level of visibility. So emerging digital technologies are going to transform packaging into smart, traceable, and sustainable assets, particularly in things like Project Sunrise, where we move from barcodes to QR codes. The ability to hold a lot more information, including where a material has come from and how to dispose of it, is going to make it a lot easier to trace the full life cycle of the packaging and be better equipped to report on how it has been disposed of, or that it has been disposed of effectively. So, in terms of a brief recap, flown through quite a lot of information, so I thank you for everybody who's stuck with me for this. The main areas that are shaping the future of sustainable packaging: cost barriers, material limitations, recycling gaps, regulatory complexity and compliance, consumer behavior misalignments, and circular economy challenges are some of the main obstacles. The solution path: strategic material choices today will reduce the future costs. New innovations will close the performance and cost gaps by 2030 plus for materials. Stronger recycling technology and clearer design for recycling guidance is both emerging and will ensure that the infrastructure performs better. Aligning the design with real recycling behavior, not just intention, is going to be vital to improve consumer behavior, as is consumer education and access to the correct stream. Collaboration all the way across the entire supply chain is going to be vital in order for everybody to work together to achieve these targets and goals. And all these topics are covered in detail throughout the full report. So that leaves me to thank you all for joining me. I've got the next steps are the report is available for purchase for £999 for a single license, £4,500 for a team of 10, or for a company it's £7,500. You can use the QR code or speak to Paul or myself. I hope that I've managed to answer some or most of your questions, but I welcome further questions now.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Camera on, and then we're good to go. Excellent. Right. So we got some really good questions from the audience. So, first question: given that regulation is evolving so fast, how can companies future-proof their packaging investments today? So, a nice, easy one to get you going.
That's a very good question. I think the key to that one is that it's a combination of not just compliance today, but it's about flexibility being designed in for tomorrow. So the companies that are going to be most resilient are those that are currently designing for circularity. So making systems modular, more use of monomaterials, making them more reusable, refillable, retainable in general. If they embed into their material choices some of the traceability things that we're talking about, that will also help to get you compliant early for things like digital product passports and Sunrise, because those are only 2 years in the future. And so that's not a lot of time to be up and running. So yeah, those would be the main things. I think that there is a series of guidelines and suggestions in the report that outline regulation and frameworks to de-risk material and technology investments also in the next 10 years.
Excellent. Okay. What are the renewable resourced material examples?
So in terms of what are the, I'd have to double check that question. So what are the materials that are available that are renewable, or what
I guess so, yeah. What are the renewable I can't speak. What are the renewable resourced material examples? Yeah, so yeah, some examples, I guess.
I'd have to come back to you on that.
I think that's one where we can come back with a considered response, I think. Yeah. Nice list.
Yeah, I can answer that one offline.
Okay, perfect. So in terms of, you mentioned about banned materials, do you see specific groups needing to be banned, following the PFAS group, for example, concern for PCBs?
Hmm. Um, Personally, I don't have any kind of opinion on what could or should be banned next. Um, I think that there needs to be a better alignment between industry and government to ensure that if they are suggesting a ban, that it is done with the understanding that there is a substitute or alternative in place. Because sometimes what happens is they come up with legislation that bans something and there isn't a alternative in place, and
Yeah,
that will cause a lot more problems than the
yeah,
banning of that initial material will
yeah,
solve.
good answer. And I guess um, having the science behind the reasons for the ban is also good good practice as well, not just like
Yeah,
um, you know
making sure that it's well that it's scientifically backed research
yeah.
rather than yeah, miscommunication.
Yeah, absolutely, which is what we have seen. A really good question here from Simon Kinnear, which is, was the report finished before or after Trump's re-election? What do you see as the likely regulatory changes due to the changes in the US government at the moment? It's sort of 100 days in
So
now, isn't it? Yeah.
it was finished after. So I was actually in Los Angeles when I was starting to write the reports, and it was finished when I got back. I think that as hard to predict as Trump and his uh, politics and plans are, um, the balanced view is that he's not going to be able to stay in office. That, of course, can change. But if he is unable to stay in office, no matter what he does in the next 4 years, and that could be fairly catastrophic, we have no way of knowing. But on balance, by the end of the decade, the hope is that most of the things that were expected to occur are more likely to kind of go back to normal. So it was written with one eye on the news and thinking, how on earth do I account for tariffs?
Yes.
But what I've decided to do is to, on balance, hope, assume, feel that he's probably going to be doing one more term, and therefore there's 6 years after him going to kind of even things out. So the
Okay.
hope is that some of these things that I'm saying might happen in 2030 might be pushed out a bit because of what's going on in the next few years. But ultimately, I think it will probably go back to what we're looking at now.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it's the uncertainty, the unpredictability of what might be coming next, which creates nervousness in the market, doesn't it? A question around chemical recycling. Is it developing as expected? I understand there are some question marks around its carbon footprint as well as financial sustainability.
That's an excellent question. Sometimes it depends on what day of the week and what study you read for chemical recycling, because it sort of goes in waves. So maybe 18 months ago, they were predicting like 20-25% coverage, and it was going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then there was a couple of problematic studies about the increased environmental impact and the decreased uh, output in terms of how good it was. Um, I think the 10 to 15 mark is actually me being conservative. The studies that I was looking at were predicting about 15 to 20% for chemical recycling. And I know there's been a couple of developments, like Exxon have got an enormous plant that is believed still in the process of being up and running, which will be able to handle vast amounts. So I think it's going to be a leading minor technology at the moment, where if they can improve a couple of things, which there are some early stage developments to reduce that environmental impact, if they can do that in the next few years, that will improve the overall carbon footprint of chemical recycling. But if not, it will probably stay in the kind of 10 to 15%.
Okay. A pivot towards refill and reuse. Are any reuse pilots gaining scale? You mentioned Loop and Algramo. Not seeing them really take off. Are you seeing any success out in the market?
One of the things that I came across when I was writing this report is there are a couple of underlying bottom line factors that are really anti-sustainability. And unfortunately, neither I nor any of the people on this call can do anything about it. So things like overconsumption, the fact that we are financially incentivized and driven to produce more, make more, sell more, rather than to produce appropriately. And the reason I state that is because one of the issues in the reuse model is that it's not as profitable as selling individual containers. So it means that while the intention might be there and the carbon footprint might be amazing and the cost savings might be there, sometimes what is happening is either it's not financially performing enough to make it worth the company's while, because none of us are charity, so we're trying to be for profit, or consumer behavior can make it difficult to scale. The consumer behavior part should be easier to address, but unfortunately, because people will sue the producer even if they don't clean up their cup, for example, it's meant that there's not a lot of appetite for some of these systems, even though they might perform really well, just because nobody wants to be open up for a lawsuit. So I think it will. I think they will grow, and they will grow to, off the top of my head, maybe like 10 to 15% in the next few years. It's just going to be that initial momentum to get it up off the ground, so that people kind of get past the initial inertia. And then if we can start to see some scaled successful pilots, which I think we will do in the next like 18 months to 2 years, that will encourage other people to follow them, and then it will grow.
Yeah, and I guess regulation is another thing that's going to influence the change. In particular, France are very pro reuse and encouraging percentages and things like that. So probably got time for a couple more questions. We'll agree that the questions we don't answer, will formally answer them as part of the outputs for the meeting, as well as recording of this very webinar. There are lots of corporate goals and emerging EPR, but the packaging industry is not seeing much real progress, and even some companies in US states taking steps backwards. What will happen to change, and when? So
what will happen to change that
yeah, so
activity?
basically there's lots of noise, but it's not so much action, I think is the sentiment of that question. Yeah. And even
I think
retracting,
it's
even going back on what initially was set out to do.
yeah. There's a number of gaps in regulation at the moment where it's easier for companies to pay the fine than to completely redesign their entire packaging lines. So aluminium foil is a great example of this one, where it's easier to just pay the fine and retain the most fit for purpose, highest shelf life, best barrier material. And there's a bit of that in EPR at the moment where it's still in that kind of chicken and egg of is it really costing me more at the moment to just not comply and just do what I'm doing? And that will change. So I think they're going to have to roll themselves back eventually as it becomes mandatory. The problem with that is, first of all, timescales. I don't know. I don't know how long it's going to take for the regulations to force people to comply to EPR. For those companies that have rolled back, I don't know if they're shooting themselves in the foot, because if there is a increased groundswell and it becomes mandated in the next couple of months, which is probably unlikely in the US or North America, but if it does suddenly gain a bit of speed, then they could be back-footed. And then you're going to have to re-engage with compliance and kind of catch up on yourself. So at the moment, if the speed with which they can kind of comply themselves is such, and the costs of non-compliance are low enough, then I don't see that changing in the short term. But if the regulations do become mandated, then just make sure, if you are rolling it back, that you can step forward very quickly.
Excellent. Okay, one last question, which is the billion-dollar question. What should companies prioritize first?
That's a great question. I think what the research has shown is that there's three pillars for prioritization: material circularity, regulatory readiness and compliance, and digital traceability. So those are the three that I would say are the most important for future sustainable packaging leadership and competitiveness. If you have the most circular or circular leaning materials, if you are fully compliant to all of the regulations, and if you can trace all of your materials all the way through their life chain, tell everybody where they are at all points, those three things are going to be the priority. Everything else is important, but those three, you can't continue without those three, because all of those are going to be so interwoven into the regulations moving forward that if you don't have them, you're not going to be on the market, because you're going to be paying very large fines.
Excellent. Very, very good answer. And all the answers were excellent. So thank you very much for your time taking us through that whistle-stop tour of your headline parts of your report, and answering people's questions when they applied. So thank you very much, Matthew. As I said, we will get this recording out to everybody by tomorrow. It might take a little bit longer to get any existing previous questions that we haven't had a chance to answer. We'll get those done, but it may not be by tomorrow, but we will get them to you. So thank you very much. You can see the QR code there. Have a look on our website, and thank you very much for your support, and see you for our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.